Good morning. My name is John Moore, and I'm the leader of PwC Canada's public sector practice. Welcome to our webcast dealing with the importance of and opportunities presented by building a digital government. We're very pleased that you're with us today. I'd like to briefly introduce you to the three speakers who will present this morning. Each will provide you with an inside look at the work that they're doing in their respective jurisdictions to make their governments truly digital. We'll kick off the event with Mr. Steve Orsini, who's the head of the Ontario Public Service. Secretary Orsini has more than 26 years experience in the Ontario Public Service, where he's also served as Deputy Minister of Finance, Secretary of the Treasury Board, and Deputy Minister of Revenue. Our next speaker is Mr. Roger Hutton. Roger is a Corporate Strategy Director in the United Kingdom and is currently on secondment to PwC. He spent most of his career in the UK Ministry of Defence in roles that include strategic planning, resource management, corporate governance, transformation, and more recently, digital. Roger will discuss how the UK is working to become a digital government. He'll cover important considerations including identity access management solutions and shifting to self-service models. Roger will share success stories, lessons learned, and the UK government's vision for the future. Finally, we're joined by Adam Lay. Adam leads our customer consulting practice in Australia and is currently overseeing two of Australia's largest and most innovative public sector transformation programs for the Departments of Human Services and Transport in the state of New South Wales. Adam will speak to the innovative advancements currently happening in that state. On behalf of PwC Canada, I'd like to personally thank each of the speakers for taking the time to join us. I'd also like to thank everyone in our virtual audience and hope that you find the session valuable. I'd now like to welcome Secretary Orsini to the podium.
Thank you, John, and thank you for PwC for inviting me to what I think is one of the most important topics we can deal with as a public service, is how do we move to a digital government. And so there's a number of things I want to accomplish today, but the two most important things that I think I'd like to share with you today is why is digital government so important? And how are we going to change how we do things to embrace digital technology? So let me go through a number of slides. The first one is people are digital. It's with mobile phones, access to the internet, that goes without saying. But it's becoming more and more pervasive, and it's affecting people and how they operate day to day. And so here are some statistics in terms of the number of people accessing the internet, the number of people who search daily for information. So it's becoming more digital, and we have to keep up with that trend. What's also interesting is the fact that people are demanding more, that consumers have greater expectations. They're getting exposed to new technologies and services, and therefore it's going to impact what they expect from their government. So a couple of key statistics is more and more people want services on their mobile device. And so this latest statistic says at least more than half. People want to be able to get access to services on a mobile device. The other interesting thing is people's expectations on government services is growing. And more people want the government to match the level of digital services available in the private sector. What's also fascinating is that the public wants to be more engaged. They want to be involved in the design of a lot of these solutions. So you're seeing a trend where consumers want to be more involved and they want services more readily available. That's going to have fundamental and profound implications for the role of government and the services we provide. Now here's a slide showing a number of different logos of different types of services that are available to the public. And it's more on the consumer side, not the business side. In the first row, you see the typical social media. If you look at the second row, you're getting more into commercial applications. And the bottom row is fundamental change to how we deliver services. E-learning is going to dramatically change how we deliver knowledge to society at large. crowdfunding, in terms of how people raise capital to invest in the new economy, is going to grow in importance. Medical services, more accessible to where people live, not where the doctor or hospital reside. And the last one is electronic voting. Is who knows what this is going to do to democracy and how we engage in public discourse on important public policy issues. So one of the things we need to do in embracing a digital world is how we look at issues. This, to me, is one of the most fundamental things we need to do. In the past, we would look at issues from the provider perspective or the vendor perspective. We deliver this service. You need to approach us and we'll provide the service. Healthcare was a classic and continues to be a classic example where we'll take the most vulnerable in society and then move them to a physician's office or take them for a diagnostic test or blood work. We move the patient to where the healthcare provider resides. You can see more and more in the future where the technology will take healthcare to the patient. And with more technology, more ways to share information, more and more of the services will move towards the patient, not the other way around. So we need to look at public services from the client's perspective. And that's going to be something we're going to need to focus on. How do we solve an issue? How do we deliver a public service more effectively? How are we going to be more cost effective in the resources we use to deliver those services? We're going to really need to focus on outcomes and really focus on the client. And that's going to change how we look at issues. In this chart, it looks at us looking at, we have to change our perspective from we provide a program or service to what does the client need. This takes me to some of the ways that we need to rethink how we engage the public. And this is a growing phenomenon in terms where people do what we call a hackathon. Now, some of our universities in Ontario, so Ryerson is a great example, would involve what they call a hackathon. You take an issue, or it would be a problem you're trying to solve, and you do a different way of approaching it. Rather than a group of people sitting in a policy shop trying to figure it out, you're going to involve the clients directly. So you bring them into a room, and you say, here's the issue we're trying to solve. And you bring entrepreneurs around. And the entrepreneurs now start to look at the issue from the client's perspective. And these are some examples that different jurisdictions have run in terms of, can we solve it from the client's perspective? And so we've done our first pilot. The Ontario government did the first pilot working with Ryerson University on a hackathon for accessibility. And there was teams competing with the best idea to solve issues for the individual. And so we can see how we can change how we approach issues in a new way, involving the public, but also using technology as a way to, as an enabler to deliver services more effectively. And so that really changes how we're going to engage the public. We need to be online, open data, where we can share more information, open dialogue where we can engage the public in terms of what do they really need, how best to deliver those services, and what are the technological solutions available. And as you can see, as different private sector firms have, you create a platform and then other people develop apps or different ideas. Government needs to move in that direction where we can begin to create different platforms and then harness the ingenuity, the innovativeness of society at large to try to solve some of our important public policy issues. And that really leads me to my last slide, where I'm trying to describe where we see the public service going for the future. And there's a number of key elements. And this is a constant theme that I'm trying to bring into the dialogue within the Ontario Public Service, is how are we, that are silo-based, ministry after ministry, delivering program after program, how are we going to be able to harness a digital government to deliver services more effectively? Well, the first thing we want to do is begin to look at the various technology platforms that are available. We have a lot of IT expertise within government. There's a vibrant, exciting private sector that's developing new ideas, and so we need to be able to work with the private sector and the public sector to really tackle the different types of technologies that are available. We need to provide more of our information in an accessible form so people can look at all the different programs and services we're delivering, and through open data, look at better ways of delivering those services for us, and really begin to crowdsource all the different ways that different individuals can solve some of the challenges we're dealing with. We want to use a consumer-focused approach. And we know, for example, healthcare, 5% of the population consumes about 2/3 of the costs. So we need to figure out what are the needs of those who have high demands on the system. How do we begin to support their way of navigating a very complex healthcare system by providing client-based wraparound services for the future? And we need to be able to work with partners. It might be the private sector. It might be other levels of government. We're going to need to work with all those out there that have an important role to play in delivering services. Another important area we're looking at is youth at risk. And youth touch upon different programs and services, whether it's healthcare, educational. And we need to be able to figure out better ways to deliver those services from their perspective that will generate better outcomes and better results for the individual and for the government delivering those programs and services. But it means we're going to have to work with the municipalities, the nonprofit sector, and delivering those services. So for me, a digital government is not only in terms of the use of technology, but changing our business model. And our business model needs to move from a provider focus to a consumer focus. It's an exciting area of work that we're doing right now. It's my pleasure to be here today with you and for those who are online watching, because I think this creates huge opportunities for the future going forward. So thank you very much.
Secretary Orsini, thank you very much for being with us today and sharing your insights with us. We, PwC, are really excited about what the province of Ontario has been doing and all your great work behind that. And we look forward to continue to working with you on your journey to becoming a digital government. So thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Now I'd like to invite our next speaker, Roger Hutton. Roger?
Digital. It's a state of mind. It's a way of seeing the world that's radically different to what has gone before. It's about technology, but that's not the first consideration. The first consideration is the user. I think that in the age of digital in which we live, or more accurately, in which we are beginning to live, it's very like those other great ways of technological innovation that have gone before. Each of those has driven not only economic, but also social and cultural change. So rail travel, for example, changed our concept of time itself. And I think that digital changes our concept of how we transact with each other as human beings, and how we transact with the organizations that govern our lives, including, of course, government. Digital gives an immediacy to our transactions that destroys old business models. For firms transacting with the public or with each other, adopting a digital mindset can be the difference between success and failure. The same is true in the public sector. In the UK, this penny dropped around the late 2000s. And it was Martha Lane Fox, now Baroness Lane Fox, the co-founder of lastminute.com, who was invited by the British government to review the provision of digital services to the public. We already had something called DirectGov. You could manage student loans, pay car tax, or seek job seekers allowance through DirectGov. But Martha Lane Fox wanted to take this to the next level. She wanted government services to be digital by default. Services so good that people prefer to use them. Digital as the primary channel for government services to the British public. Were the British public ready for this? Research in 2012 suggested that 82% were already online, with 77% using the internet at least once a day. So yes, by and large, they were. And with digital by default came the Government Digital Service, GDS. And GDS's mission statement is pretty clear-cut, and I quote, "We help government make digital services and information simpler, clearer, and faster. We put users' needs before the needs of government." So GDS set about trying to make that happen. They formed a network of departmental digital leaders, of whom I was one. Meeting monthly, we shared knowledge and experience. We became a senior guiding coalition for the digital by default agenda across government. Each department published its own digital strategy in line with the overall intent, with a clear framework set by GDS. That framework centred on a digital by default service standard and a government service design manual. I make no apologies for drawing on the standard and the manual in the following because it's a good framework. The 18 points in the service standard are effectively policy direction, principles such as user first, and the use of agile acquisition. The service design manual goes into detail on implementation. Perhaps most importantly, GDS got hands-on. And at the heart of this was gov.uk, the primary portal for government services and information. User first is evident all over gov.uk. It's a simple portal with a simple design, giving easy access to government services and information. You find things by search. Departments and their associated arm's-length bodies migrated their content to gov.uk over a period of about a year and a half. In numbers, 312 agencies and government organisations moved on to gov.uk, 685 website domains and subdomains closed, more than 1.8 million redirects from old government websites, and more than 150,000 pages published to gov.uk. Not everybody took to it straight away. Some people disliked losing content. Some people just didn't understand the new rules. We had to police rogue URL generation really quite closely. But gov.uk is now well established. It even won the Design of the Year award in 2013 for its clear, simple design. So transferring content was a mammoth task in itself. What came next? Well, what came next was the Exemplar programme, and you've got just 3 examples there, but there were 25 new platforms for major services designed to showcase the potential for digital to transform government. And there you have 3 examples: registering to vote, claiming for carers allowance, booking a prison visit. 20 of those services are now live, and the other 5 are in various stages of development. One important aspect of the Exemplar programme was the high-profile involvement of ministers. After all, it's ministers who have the public profile for digital in their departments. That means ministers need to be involved every step on the way in the digital journey. 25 exemplars then. The 26th, if you like, is the well-established car tax process, vehicle licensing. And sometimes it's worth just reflecting on what it was like in the old pre-digital days. Then the vehicle licensing process went something like this: a reminder through the post that your car tax is due, a trip to the post office during your lunch hour with a bundle of documents and a cheque, the person behind the counter checking the documents, then writing out your vehicle's details onto a circular piece of paper, you handing over your handwritten cheque, you going home and putting that paper disc into a plastic holder in your car windscreen. And if there's something wrong with your car tax disc, the police have to inspect the paper disc itself in your car, which they have to locate first. So that's how it was. Nowadays, the process is this: A reminder comes through the post that your car tax is due. Okay, that's the same as it was, but I don't doubt that in time it will be an email. You log on using the credentials in the reminder. The system links into insurance and roadworthiness databases. You pay online using a card. Or, if like me, you drive a hybrid, you don't pay, so you miss out that part of the transaction. And that's it. No tax disc, because enforcement is based on vehicle number plate recognition. With the exception of the reminder letter, totally digital. Now, I really take my hat off to the people who put that together, linking up across government to put the citizen first. I take my hat off because, stating the obvious, government's big. Connecting it up is difficult. And sometimes there's an issue of understanding. There's an issue of digital literacy. When you say digital, a lot of people think technology. A lot of people think digital, it's a tablet, isn't it? Well, it could be. But as I said at the beginning, digital is a mindset. It's a mindset that starts with the user, and it might end up with a tablet or an app or a website, but it certainly doesn't begin there. It's informed by the availability of those things and of the technology that we anticipate, but it doesn't begin there. How to instill the digital mindset in government? You don't have to be Generation Y or Z to have the mindset. It just requires an openness to new ideas and a willingness to be energized by them. UK government departments are working on their digital literacy. It's a commonplace nowadays, for example, for senior staff meetings to be facilitated in some digital way. It raises awareness, but it also encourages people to adopt. In the same way that learning a language is best done by living in the country where that language is spoken, public servants have to live in the world of digital. To my mind, social media is an essential part of this. It has its pitfalls, of course, but for public servants, it's a new and key discipline alongside the many skills needed to support a modern democracy. Digital is best if it's end-to-end. The interface the citizen sees should be a true reflection of what's going on within the department's own systems. The same efficiencies that the citizen experiences ought also to be happening within departmental processes. In practice, I suspect there's often a bit of a gear change between the modern digital interface that the citizen sees and the systems that support the transaction. The gear change is getting smoother and smoother, though, and a lot of that is about applications program interfaces, APIs, the clever bits of coding that enable third-party applications to draw on core platforms. Transport for London, for example, makes its live travel information available so that developers build apps which enable the citizen to know through their smartphones when their bus or train is due. HM Revenue and Customs recently launched an API strategy. By way of context, HM Revenue and Customs is responsible for more than 2/3 of all UK government transactions. That's 1.24 billion per year. 92.7% of those are conducted online, the rest by post and by phone. 3/4 of HMRC online transactions use a third-party product, interfacing through an API and supported by more than 600 third-party software developers. HMRC plans to make richer APIs available, to broaden the scope for developers, to bring new and more sophisticated products to market. Now, for government departments, this kind of approach means maximising revenue, improving customer experience, and minimising costs. It's also a shot in the arm for private enterprise. And what about the citizen? The picture, as you might expect, is changing all the time. The trend for accessing government services is away from desktops and towards mobile phones. As I mentioned before, not all UK citizens are online, and research shows that around 23% of British citizens lack basic digital skills. So GDS has done a lot to promote the concept of assisted digital for those who aren't online. It's there in the service design manual. Assisted digital support is for those people who cannot use online government services on their own. And that's an important distinction. For example, the online lasting power of attorney service, one of the 25 exemplars, will often be completed by the relative seeking power of attorney, not by the donor themselves. So, those who are offline often have someone to help them. It could be a relative or it could be a charity. Where there isn't such help, though, there are options like telephone or counter services. And there's a subtle distinction between those who choose not to use digital but have the skills and those who do not have the skills or the access. Digital by default is all about encouraging the take-up of the former and helping the latter. So how do you increase the take-up of government services? Well, first of all, know what your user wants. Don't give them what they don't want. Assist those trying to get online. Promote the online channel. Stress the benefits, then repeat. Work out where the user is still engaging offline and engage them there to tell them about the digital offering. Gradually wind down the offline channels, paper forms, for example, though with due respect for assisted digital need. Reward the digital user. So HM Revenue and Customs, again, for example, offered discounts to small businesses for conducting tax transactions online. In the end, though, customers liked the ease of use so much that that was enough. HMRC switched to emphasising the non-fiscal benefits and stopped the fiscal incentives. And finally, if you want to increase take-up, the service has to be secure. Let's dwell on that for a moment. And in particular, let's talk about identity management. Identity management is, of course, crucial to building trust in online government services, crucial to both sides of the transaction. The UK government's identity management system is called gov.uk Verify. How does Verify work? Well, it uses certified companies which have high standards in looking after personal information. 4 at the moment, with another 5 coming on stream soon. The citizen chooses from a list of those companies and sets up an identity account. It takes about 15 minutes to do so. Verify's key principles include anonymity, data minimization, and user control. Privacy is overseen by an independent privacy and consumer advisory group. And Verify's current status, it's in public beta with a plan to move to live in April this year. It's currently available to citizens using 9 government services, for example, signing into your personal tax account. It'll apply to all in due course. There's currently about 80% demographic coverage, so 80% of UK citizens could use it if they wanted to, aiming at 90% by live. Latest figures are 333,000 users. In time, Verify identity should be usable with other organisations and even other governments. And the European Union is working on a new system to enable identities to cross borders. The UK government completed its regular spending review in November last year. In the 2010 version of the spending review document, the word digital appeared 4 times. In the latest version, it appeared 57 times. The review announced an investment of £1.8 billion in digital technology and transformation across the public sector over the next 4 years. Funding for GDS was increased substantially to £450 million over the same period. Against this backdrop, the headline for the Government Digital Service is Government as a Platform. This concept, Government as a Platform, is designed to introduce more coherence into the provision of government digital services and to eliminate duplication. Government as a Platform is a building block approach, with each block performing a single function. So gov.uk is a platform for information and services, gov.uk Verify is a platform for identity assurance, 2 platforms that are already out there. The vanguard for the new wave of government as a platform is gov.uk Pay. GDS is aiming by 2020 for Pay to give citizens the option to pay online for every central government service. They are aiming for Pay to feel, for the citizen, the way commercial web-based transactions feel for the consumer. For there to be a single platform for new online transactions rather than having to design a new one with every new service. for it to be easier and cheaper to launch new services, for government to be able to adopt new innovations from the financial technology industry rather than doing it piecemeal across multiple platforms. Gov.uk is just in the process of moving from alpha to beta, worth keeping an eye on. So, there's a lot going on in UK government digital. What, in my view, do you need to make it all work? Well, first of all, you need strong leadership. You need those at the top of government departments to have a clear vision of the digital future. They don't have to be digital natives. They just have to get it and make sure everyone else gets it. Those driving digital at all levels below the leadership are then empowered with the authority to make the change. Second, you need to resource digital adequately. And I don't just mean money, though of course you need that, but I mean the people resource. The developers, the coders, the user experience specialists, the people who can facilitate agile. Third, government departments have to be ready to give up the old ways of doing things. The old ways, the paper-based, process-heavy, unnecessarily complicated ways, will persist because they have institutional inertia. One option is just to let the old ways wither on the vine. Far preferable, I think, is to tackle them now. What, in the modern parlance, we tend to call disruption. So, disrupt existing business models to get ahead of the game. There are risks to be managed, of course, but those shouldn't stifle imagination. Not easy, I know. How do you get big government departments to embrace this agenda? I often quote Francis Maude, now Lord Maude, the government minister who nurtured GDS through its early years. He said, "You don't change culture by trying to change culture. You change culture by doing things differently." And that's what GDS did. They put gov.uk out there as the only option, the better option. Departments had to play by those rules, better rules. And that's what they continue to do. Thank you.
Roger, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule and be with us here in Toronto today. I'm certain that the insights that you've shared with us today will be quite valuable to all of those who joined us in Canada and internationally. So thank you again.
Thanks, Jill.
Now, I would like to invite our next speaker to join us, Adam Lay. Adam Lay is with our federal PwC team and clients in Ottawa. So over to Ottawa.
Hello, everyone in the room and also online. I'm really happy to be here. My name's Adam Lay. I'm the Customer Experience Leader for PwC Australia, and I am supporting a number of public sector organisations over there transform their business. And I'm really excited to be here because I love Canadians. As I found out last night, I love Canadian meat. And I had to go to New York to get the trolley to experience a Canadian storm, which is quite ironic. But nonetheless, it's fitting that we're talking about Australia today because today is actually Australia Day over there, which is a time to celebrate all that we've accomplished and also a time to look to the future, which sounds awfully philosophical, and I can tell you right now that most Australians are just having a barbecue in the middle of the day rather than thinking too much about the digital future. But right now in Australia it's about 5 a.m, so you might experience me waking up throughout this presentation, which will be pretty exciting. What I'm going to talk about is what I've learnt supporting a number of government organisations through quite significant change and also observing it from the outside, particularly the state government level. And I wanted to bring it to life with a couple of examples, but really focus on the business transformation elements over the technical transformation elements, which I think certainly something that the other speakers did as well, which, by the way, I very, very much enjoyed. And while the context might be slightly different, so we categorise things differently, if you like. We have different things in the state government is responsible for. I'm sure that you'll see that there's a lot we can learn. So Australia's doing a lot of really good things. New South Wales in particular is doing a number of really good things. They've set up a customer service commissioner within New South Wales. They've got customer-centred goals for the first time ever that have been articulated in a state plan at a state level and then also cascading down across all government departments. They've got a digital council, and they have a program of work that talks to the customer-centred and digital-centred initiatives. And they're also measuring customer service holistically for the first time ever through a customer service index, a balanced scorecard approach that's then reported out publicly, which are quite significant steps. So just by way of background, New South Wales is Australia's largest state. We've got about 8 million people, and if you've ever seen the population distribution of Australia, we all live on the outside near the beaches because it's lovely out there, and on the inside it's a little bit harder to live. But within New South Wales, about just over half the population, I understand, live within Sydney itself. So it's quite densely populated into cities, which is great. And the New South Wales government is responsible for transport, health, education, police and justice, family and community services. And they're delivering quite a number of very, very exciting initiatives at the moment that I might talk through a couple now, because digital is really key to their strategy. The first is Service New South Wales, which is the formulation of an operating entity under that Customer Service Commissioner that looks at bringing together the front end of service delivery across public sector organisations. So it's very much modelled almost on that Service Canada type model. And digital is at the heart of that. And now they're looking at even greater innovation. So over the next little while, they'll be running a program to look at digital licences that's been announced by the Minister, which will be a real game changer. Integrate licences around something digital rather than something physical, which is just great. Transport for New South Wales, which I've talked about to a couple of folks in Canada, have undertaken an amazing transformation around the customer. And to the previous speaker's points, that's been driven by the guts and determination at the ministerial level, the secretary level, what we call the deputy secretary level below that, and everybody in that organisation, really putting the customer at the heart. And digital has been critical. We've seen new websites, we've seen social media, we've seen real-time applications, which I'll talk a little bit about shortly. We've seen electronic ticketing and digitisation of internal processes that have been real game changers. The state government also looks after emergency services in each jurisdiction, so police, fire, ambulance and emergency services. And one of the things that's been key to really changing the citizen experience across Australia is conversations with them, and trying to identify programs of work to allow new modes of communications with emergency services. So much like the Next Generation 911 and Next Generation 112 kind of initiatives globally, Next Generation 000 seeks to identify how we can change the whole system to support reporting through apps, cars reporting, reporting through SMS and MMS, alarms automatically reporting, social media reporting and so on. And that's been amazing because we've had to bring people together from all different parts of government to collaborate at each jurisdiction. We've also seen quite significant steps in improving the student experience at universities as that becomes more competitive in our region, particularly using digital there as a differentiator. Health, electronic medical records, and of course some significant steps that we're making federally at the moment around major welfare programs and some work in defence. What I want to talk about is some of the learnings associated with that, and in particular, I'm going to refer to those three initiatives, which were the Service New South Wales program of work, the Transport for New South Wales program of work, and the emergency services work that we've been doing as really specific examples to bring to life those principles. The first, which is very consistent with the other speakers, of course, is to put the customer at the heart of design. Now, New South Wales, with the change of government about 6 or 7 years ago, put the customer at the heart of service delivery, and that was one of the key platforms that they put forward and got them elected. And they established that as a noble goal in and of itself. However, obviously, as you work through the detail of this, there are broader government outcomes and citizen needs that need to be considered. But when considering those government outcomes, there are some wonderful lessons that suggest that one should seek to understand what the customer thinks about these things and design the system from the outside in rather than the inside out. Certainly I've been lucky enough to speak to thousands of customers on behalf of the New South Wales government, and they tell us very, very consistently that they want that end-to-end and seamless service delivery experience. They want it to be proactive and anticipatory. They want it to be customised and dynamic to meet their needs and circumstances as they change. And they want it to be accessible and inclusive. And to do that, it's very hard if you're sitting within a government organisation trying to digitise stuff and then jam it out into the community rather than looking at it from the outside in, of course. And so there's been lots of work done to support an omni-channel view of customers. And in particular, lots of customer journey mapping work in transport, for example, looking right from the initial trying to understand information and trying to plan your trip all the way through your transport journey. Lots of work, obviously, customer journey mapping in health and welfare, emergency services and the like, and then from there drawing digital initiatives
and understanding the context in which they'll be implemented rather than digitising transactions. We have embraced new ways of working with customers, much like some of the hackathon type models that were put forward there, with significant co-design sessions being delivered with citizens across New South Wales, and we've been lucky to be involved in quite a few of those, including a recent accessibility session, which I understand Ontario did something quite similar, where we brought together citizens who had particular access needs, vision impaired, hearing impaired, cognitive impaired, and living with physical accessibility needs together to understand their transport experience in the future. And from there, we were able to deliver a program of work that was quite significant to transform that experience, including a whole lot of digital initiatives. Looking from the outside in also obviously gives you some great breakthrough opportunities rather than just digitising transactions, including things like digital licences, and we can understand the value of those in that context. One of the key steps that we've done is to actually digitise, in some cases, digitise that interaction with customers. So holding digital panels, for example, being able to undertake ideas jams with citizens. So, for example, at the front end of at the Transport for New South Wales master plan that's coming up, they're considering using digital platforms to engage customers, which is very, very exciting. And what we've found through the research, because now, of course, we're measuring pretty holistically the customer experience, is that when done well, customers are far happier with digital channels than other manual channels. They're empowered, it's simpler, it's more straightforward, and they can do it on their own time when it's done well. The second main learning was leadership. It's my personal opinion, having seen quite a few programs go really, really well in New South Wales, that leadership should absolutely be your biggest digital advocate. And by that I mean the minister, the secretary level, and the deputy secretary level, as we say. So that's the kind of the stack of the leadership team, as well as all the teams. We've seen some amazing programs of work. For example, the real-time apps, which I might just give you a little overview of. So Transport for New South Wales wanted to provide better real-time information for customers, but rather than designing apps themselves and pushing out to market, they use that hackathon kind of approach. So they got their open data together, they built an API, and they brought together. We invited 900 app developers directly, and we also went out through a social media campaign to invite those app developers to put together a proposal to come and support develop apps. The winner, of course, would get access to the real-time data and have the ability to put those up on the App Store, monetise them in any way they liked, because the benefit for Transport was that people had real-time information. They didn't necessarily want to make money out of it. And then Transport would also promote those apps on network and also cut a deal with them that would allow the staff to have the apps on their mobile phone to help them talk to customers. So about 60 people applied, about 40 came to a 48-hour hackathon, about 6 were chosen, and within 12 weeks there were 6 new apps up on the App Store that provided real-time information for customers. A complete game changer, and Transport didn't pay for the development of that. So every night now when they go to sleep, there are people there in their garages or in offices developing apps, making them better, consistently competing, and they've created that environment through that open data kind of approach. It's been a real game changer, and the feedback's been phenomenal. That, partnered with some of their work around digital ticketing, has completely changed the Transport experience. That couldn't have come about without lockstep and aligned leadership from the top few levels in particular, because we broke the rules in a lot of different ways. We broke a lot of, it was a real sacred cow that, we had to develop everything internally rather than use the app developer community. So it was absolutely fantastic. We're seeing the rise of the role of the chief customer officer, the chief digital officer in government as well. But the best example in Transport, again, is Tony Braxton-Smith, who's head of customer service. And his role is to be an advocate. It's to orchestrate people coming together. And it's also to deliver a couple of cross-cutting programs. We're also seeing Mike Pratt, who's that Customer Service Commissioner, having a similar role on all those 3 fronts as advocate, orchestrator and deliverer. And I believe that's been critically important for driving that outside-in transformation. The next is collaboration. A lot of the breakthroughs, as we discussed in the development of the strategy around emergency services, have come from taking your own hat off and working together very, very differently. Because working within your silos, once again, leads one down a path of identifying what are the transactions that impact me and how can I get citizens to do things differently. We're also seeing that role of the CCO and CDO being a key to facilitating sharing across government. So one of the things the Customer Service Commission is doing very effectively across New South Wales at the moment is identifying all the good practice and then sharing that across. For example, a recent Salesforce implementation for complaint systems. Because of the changing environment and technology changing so quickly, the New South Wales Government also, in a couple of pockets, has been quite quick to embrace engagement and collaboration with industry participants. So holding industry events where, rather than coming out through a traditional proposal process and saying, I've defined what my needs are, can you go and pitch on that? They've gone out to the community and said, here are the outcomes that I want to deliver. How could you support us in quite an open way? And they found that many of the industry participants are quite happy to come and at their own expense to support those kind of conversations. And of course, different ways of hackathons and different ways of bringing app developers in. A point that was already raised, which I think is another key learning, is one of looking at digital not just as a channel and not just content, but as a systematic and systemic transformation. A lot of the big steps that we've taken have involved business model changes beyond merely just looking at technology change. And in fact, even if an app is part of that, or a piece of digital content is part of that, it's not always the most complicated thing. For example, that emergency services transformation that I discussed will require holistic transformation to funding models, governance models, and a lot of the core technology that underpins it, of course, as well. That leads us down a path of obviously supporting different ways of developing software, and in particular embracing agile ways of working. So moving away from that, the Dilbert cartoon type, I'm going to write a strategy, I'm going to write a business case, I'm going to do detailed design, I'm going to write a business case, I'm then going to go out to market, then I'm going to do something else, then I'm going to build it, and 5 years later a customer sees something. But unfortunately, needs have changed, technology's changed, and because of all the handoffs in between there, the customer doesn't actually get delivered what the business wanted originally. But because we work in government, obviously there are absolutely critical requirements in some of these programs around control, accountability, risk, and transparency and the like. So we need to find a way of balancing those. The best models of balancing those two things that I've seen in New South Wales government is by having better design processes. So designing the design process, bringing governance and decision makers in very, very early on to understand what their requirements would be, so that the approval and sign-off processes flows more smoothly. And we can manage things from a design architecture very tightly. Another key learning is implementing change in a customer-centred way. So in all the conversations that we've had with customers, one of the interesting things that keeps coming up is we find customer evidence that suggests that they don't necessarily want large-scale transformational change without seeing any change over the next 5 years. They'd like to see incremental change. And one of the things that I've heard many, many times is they don't want perfect to get in the way of progress. They're quite happy with that iterative, continuous improvement. We've particularly seen a real focus on engaging frontline staff in some of these programs of work. And so we'd hold collaboration sessions with people who deal with customers every day. One of the powerful things, of course, in undertaking that kind of step is that you put yourself in the staff shoes and you realise that a lot of these digital apps and a lot of the capability that we're giving to citizens, they also want to improve the way in which they work. And it's critically important that we create digital supported channels. It's critically important that the staff are very, very aware of these things from a communication standpoint, but of course, like all change management efforts, having them engaged up front engenders ownership. We better understand the context in which it's being implemented, and so as a result of that, execution's far more successful. A flow-on activity of a lot of this digital work has been that we've got far better data now on what citizens are doing and their behaviours. And transport's a great example of that with digital ticketing, and I know that many of you have gone down the path of a digital ticketing type environment. The types of information that you get is so rich and it's really fantastic and allows you to really hone your service offering. So there's lots of very, very exciting things going on, but I did talk about the learnings of putting the customer at the heart, leadership, collaboration, systematic transformation, implementing change in a customer-centred way, and then people and data. But I just wanted to leave you with one thought, because having seen a lot of organisations, government organisations globally try and implement this, and often try and deliver the wonderful opportunities that the digital environment does for customers around access and empowerment and the like, and often viewing those who don't have access or are unwilling to use digital challenges as a problem, and trying to figure out how we work around it and get them online. The challenge that I like to put out to clients is always to reposition that challenge to being what a great opportunity to provide those members with digital assets and a digital environment in which they can participate with government to remove the digital divide and reframe the challenge around that problem statement rather than one of how do we get people online. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam, for those interesting insights into the Australian experience with digital. I'm Janice Wagner, and I am the National Public Sector Digital Lead for PwC, and I will be your moderator for this afternoon's Q&A session. And to start us off, we have a question for Secretary Orsini. So we've heard a lot about the importance of governance in advancing the digital agenda. How is Ontario planning on addressing governance and ministerial authorities to help Ontario advance its digital agenda?
Very good question. In many respects, if you look at our current governance within the Ontario government or any public service, you have ministers, deputy ministers, and ministries with all their different program areas. And they're quite complex organizations. They have a policy shop, they have HR, legal, communications, program delivery, information and communications, technology, support. And all of them need to work together to deliver any type of program or service. But we live in complex systems. So we have complex organizations and complex systems. And we might be the Ontario government might be one of many people trying to address a particular citizen need or client need. And so what we're finding is if we always step back to, from our perspective of how we want to approach an issue, we'll have a lot of programs that might do a slice of the pie, but not, as the previous two speakers, end-to-end solutions. And so I think the governance, we need two important components from my perspective. One is looking at the outcomes you're trying to achieve and the people you're trying to support, and involve the people that are delivering those services outside your organization. And you got to really create these horizontal teams or networks to get past the silo or the program specific area that you may be responsible for. So it means bringing in new networks, new teams to ensure that those others have a voice in developing the solution, including the citizen.
Thank you, Secretary Orsini. Our next question will be for Roger. You talked about the 25 exemplars or use cases that the UK has up and running currently, or almost the last, I think you said 3 more are still to come. How were they identified, prioritized, and funded?
Okay, and I would stress that the exemplar program is now mature. Most of those exemplars are up and running and well established. But going back in time a little bit, it was a process across government where it was led by the Government Digital Service, who set the standards, and the individual departments came forward with their proposals for exemplars, and they were accepted into this program. And the word exemplar is important because it was designed to demonstrate that you could do this. That was the point, really. So there would have been other programs out with the 25, but the 25 were to demonstrate you could do this thing. And I guess the main point I would draw, the main lesson I would draw from the UK government experience was that at the heart of this you had the digital service standard, the design manual, which coalesced and cohered the 25 exemplars. There was something, a beating heart to this process. So if you want to pursue that kind of program across government, it's very important to have that kind of beating heart in place.
Thank you, Roger. So Adam, this one's for you in Ottawa. What were the key digital technology enablers that the Australian government addressed, and why?
That's a big question. That's a very big question. Look, I think as far as digital is concerned, there's obviously a number of capabilities that need to be put into place to achieve these successful delivery of the programs. The first is that one of sensing, really understanding what it is that customers want, understanding what technology is coming down the pipeline, so scanning across the horizon. There's a whole lot of formal and informal mechanisms to doing that, but in particular, we've seen a rise of small teams undertaking global best practice research, small teams understanding what customers want. So the first one's around scanning the horizon. The next then is one which is more of a governance and funding capability, which is having the velocity of being able to allocate funds to new programs in different kinds of ways rather than necessarily relying on budget processes, so to give that agility in the investment process. And then finally, the third is probably one of being able to identify how you can work in formal and informal relationships between different people, so working differently with the industry, working different with app developers, and working differently across governmental silos. And then obviously investing in the skills and capability of the people, because there's a lot of work going on at the moment, not just in New South Wales but across Australia. There's a number of really large scale transformation programs where a lot of the good digital resources have been sucked up into that, as well as obviously the demand in the private sector. So if we looked at some of the enablers there, the first one was quite obvious, that's to understand what customers want, but also understand what the art of the possible is. That's why that's important. The second around velocity is obviously important because of the fact that we need to allocate funds in different kinds of ways, take risks in different kinds of ways when you pursue some of these digital programs. And that third around plasticity obviously is important, because if we look within our silos, then we fall back into the mindset of I have something that I can digitise and push it out rather than looking from the outside in. So I think that's the answer to that one.
Thank you, Adam. Next question, back to Secretary Orsini. Besides hackathons, what are other effective or efficient ways the Ontario provincial government is engaging clients in polling and/or service design?
So there's a variety of different ways. We have so many ways to reach out and connect with the public. We've often formed panels where you bring a variety of different stakeholders and experts to a given topic, and these expert panels with consumers on it is also an effective way. We also bring in private-public sector partnerships. So we might be doing something jointly with a different group to come up with a solution, someone that's been actively involved and develop expertise in that area, and that's always an effective way. But I think the key thing is having a very open approach, sharing information so people can look for things that you may not be even aware of, that someone could build a better application or solution for something you're grappling with. But it's really being open and crowdsourcing a lot of things that we're doing. And that means having an open dialogue. That means putting even the things you're thinking about online. And I'll give you an example in Ontario. As the Premier wrote mandate letters for each minister saying, here's all the things I'd like you to work on over the next year or two. And putting those online means we're even crowdsourcing the policy issues we're thinking about. And that opens up a dialogue much earlier upstream in the policy development process. And I think that's where a lot of the interesting and exciting work will come, from engaging people much earlier in the process with a client focus.
Thank you, Secretary Orsini. Adam, back to you. We've been asked if you could share some of the Australian experience with hackathons, as well as how Australia is engaging their citizenry as well in citizen-centric design.
Yep. So hackathons have come from probably a couple of different angles. So the first angle has been one of getting breakthrough changes in the customer experience. So, customers have told us this, we need to achieve it. Is there a better way of doing it? So, we go out to market and try a different way of working. At the same time, part of the trigger has been the open data movement and the demand for citizens to have access to data and the business community to have access to data. And if you provide it to us, we can do something with it, and you're not using it. The citizen benefits, and so does the private sector. So we've really sweeping through Canberra and particularly New South Wales, but I've also seen it particularly in Brisbane. We've participated in quite a few of them, and in Victoria, a real drive for most public sector data to be considered as an opportunity for open data, with the exception of that which is, there's privacy and other kind of challenges associated with it. So the experience in Australia has been that there are a couple of different standard models, one of which is a program-by-program type model where around a specific issue. So, for example, as I said before, the program around accessibility apps, program around road apps. So we provided real-time information out to the app developer community to create road apps for journey planning and real-time management of your driving in a car. We've also seen it for specific need groups. So, for example, students, trying to improve the student experience, how you bring those folks together, or how you bring together groups from the Indigenous community, which has been one that a couple of weeks ago I was personally involved in, which is absolutely fantastic, and that was a testament to understanding the value of asking a customer how to solve their service problem, rather than necessarily asking people within the organisation what they could provide to Indigenous communities to improve their experience. So it's really been that we've brought together either customers to co-design, or it's been the app developer community to design apps. And a couple of things that I've learnt is the need to absolutely every time identify the what's in it for me to get people to attend these. If they don't see a value proposition, you won't necessarily get the quality of people participating in these, nor will you get the number or volume that you want. Secondly, you have to have a really well-designed process that allows the participants to have the right inputs. So if it's voice of the customer data, or descriptions of what the data actually is, or if it's necessarily something about your business model and how they'll be working together with you in the future, that's absolutely critical to get the inputs right. And then it's about getting diversity in the pipeline of people who are coming. You want people from different points of view. You want to be able to provide a process which allows them to mash up various teams. So we've run things in the healthcare industry, for example, where we'll have educators and healthcare providers come together with app developers and someone from a different industry altogether to really mix up some of the solutions and get those breakthroughs. That's critically important, as is also getting early sign-off from government procurement and government leadership that we're able to contract in a different kind of way with these people once we've identified who the winners are. So that's really the experience that we've had, Janice.
Thanks, Adam. So, Roger, this one's for you. You spoke about the platform services such as UK.Vic and UK Pay. What other services are envisioned to be part of this platform of services that the UK government's pursuing?
Okay, so that's the question on everyone's lips, really, because what we have at the moment is gov.uk Pay, which has been advertised, is in development, as I explained earlier, but we aren't sure what's coming after that. And I guess that GDS, having had this really quite generous settlement in the spending review, will be thinking very much about what the next thing is that they do. I could speculate on what those things might be, but I don't think that's particularly helpful. All I would do is suggest that if you search government as a platform online, you'll find a YouTube video provided by the Government Digital Service, which in a minute and a half suggests some of the kinds of directions they might go in. But as I say, I think what they want to do at the moment is they want to develop Pay, they want to bank it, they want to prove that the concept works, and then they can follow on with other ideas. But at the moment, as I say, that's $1 million question. What is the next platform after Pay?
Thanks, Roger. So this one is for Secretary Rossini. We've heard a lot about working across multiple jurisdictions. From the Ontario point of view, in terms of pursuit of a single digital identity, what is Ontario doing to help ease citizen access across all levels of service, federal, provincial, and municipal?
Yeah, so one of the things that experience has taught us, and we had this with the single business number, and I think Roger talked about it, is through the verification process. You really need to know who you're dealing with. So creating a single business number has helped to transform a lot of the programs and services we deal with business. And they have one identifier, and we know who we're dealing with day in and day out when we deal with them digitally. On the consumer side, that's a little more challenging because we have so many different programs that have created over the years, because of privacy and concerns about privacy, separate numbers. And so it's hard to link them up in a way that through our existing privacy structure, in a way that they have consent in the process. And so one of the things we've done is start a process working with the Privacy Commissioner, working with a variety of ministries, working with the federal government through our benefits number. So we are looking at creating a number that we can verify who the individual is so that we can find a better way to integrate the services we provide that individual. And so they don't have to constantly repeat the same information time in and time out in terms of who they are, where they live. And when they change their address, in one instance, it captures it throughout the system. Now, we've done that in some areas with a health card, driver's license, so we're expanding that through Service Ontario, and they have a very bold plan to continue doing that. But we have a whole bunch of other programs and services, social assistance, all these different programs who try to help the most vulnerable, and yet they have to repeat that same information over and over again. And I know this is something that the federal government's keen on. So working with Service Canada, Service Ontario, and with our benefits team, we're looking at creating a single number on the benefits side to make it easier for people to access programs and services.
Thank you, Secretary Orsini. I'm going to ask this question of all of you, since you all have unique perspectives given your roles in government as well as your jurisdictional perspectives. Why has government not moved as fast as, say, banks in moving to digital services? What have been the key barriers to overcome? And let's start with Roger, please.
Okay, that is a very challenging and interesting question, isn't it? Because why has government not moved quite as fast as some parts of the private sector? I think it may be that you're working in a different context. So you're working in obviously in a government context, in a politicised context, and you have to tread carefully some aspects of that. I think in some areas government has moved very quickly. So the use of social media, for example, in government, I think is comparable now with that in the private sector. And it has to be, because that's how news is generated these days. I think in terms of the big transactional parts of digital, well, I think it's partly down to that digital literacy point that I made before in my speech, in that my personal impression is that colleagues in government have taken a little bit of time to become fully digitally literate, particularly at the senior level, and it's partly a demographic thing. It's partly also the transactional pull. You know, what's pulling this? And in the private sector, of course, you may survive or not survive depending on whether you adopt digital. In the public sector, your survival is maybe not in question, but your effectiveness is. So maybe the dynamic and the pull and the demand side has been slightly different, but I don't know, what do you think, Steve?
I think there may be three factors that influence the pace in which government adopts digitalization. One would be the incentive structure. If you're delivering a monopoly service, so you're the only provider, you don't have those competitive pressures in finding new ways of delivering those services. That's changing. Given the fiscal environment we live in, we are constantly focused on driving better value for dollars spent. So I think the incentive structure is changing. It's not as direct as a direct threat or competition, but it's there. And as we've seen with some services, with the Ubers of the world and so forth, that what you think is a pretty stable sector can dramatically change. And we know from our tax side, this new sharing economy will have an impact on our revenue. So I think government is much more attuned to that, to the incentive side. The second one, there's a bit risk adverseness in the system. Part of it is, if something goes wrong, it's on the front page of the newspapers. And it's hard for folks to be bold, innovative in a risk-adverse environment. So I think we have to give license to piloting, testing the waters a bit. And so that's changing the culture, and I think that's important. And the third one, I think, it comes to leadership, we have to make it a priority. If you want to be innovative, saying you want to be innovative doesn't come by thinking you want to be innovative. It's your quote, Roger. It's by doing things differently, by driving a focus, a relentless focus to innovate and to use digital technology as an enabler for that innovation. And that is a key driver right now, and I think that's going to be one of the most important things going forward.
Thank you. Adam, over to you.
Look, I think they're both very, very comprehensive answers, and I'd agree with them. The only thing I'd say that was to add to that was really that the private sector, yes, while it may have different incentives to behave differently and therefore might move faster in some realms, I think that the opportunity for government is far greater in some areas, particularly when it looks at generating social value rather than necessarily just focusing on a commercial value. And that focus on social value means that they can form partnerships with new people and deliver services in a very, very different way. We see that in pockets, working across different health and social welfare, or working with the not-for-profit sector as well as with government. And I think digital is one of those things that can bring a lot of that front-end service delivery together for greater social value. So while that may well be the case, I think that there's a great opportunity for us in the future as well.
Thanks, Adam. So this will be our last question, and this one's for Roger. In developing gov.uk, you mentioned security was key to increasing take-up. I'm assuming as well that there were privacy issues that you encountered. What were they, and how were they addressed?
Well, there'll always be privacy issues in this domain. When you're discussing digital, of course, we're all concerned to make sure that our data is kept safely and that privacy is observed. I don't think there's been any specific issues about privacy that have hindered the development of digital in UK government, but occasionally you get related issues so for example, when you introduce a new service, what you sometimes find is that a kind of rogue provider will appear online offering the same service with a charge. And how do you negotiate around that avenue? And the way you do it is you're constantly agile and you're constantly finding ways of making sure that doesn't happen, and you block off those people who are endangering the core concepts of privacy. So I think that's the key thing that you have to do, because this is such a fast-moving world. There will always be issues coming up, whether of privacy or of the kind of rogue sites that I've talked about. And we collectively have constantly to be agile and alive to those dangers, and finding the workarounds or the blocks that make sure that the citizen remains safe when they're conducting those online transactions, and the government remains safe as well.
Perfect. So thank you all for your questions today. We covered a wide gamut of topics. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get all of the questions that came through our polling, but we will be providing answers to every question that was answered, and we will be sending those answers out to all registered participants. So again, thank you for those questions. I'd like to thank our fantastic speakers today, and for being such marvelous panelists and being able to answer the questions that were thrown their way. So thank you very much. Lastly, I'd like to thank all of our participants, both those who are live in person as well as for those folks who have joined virtually through our webinar. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, found it informative, and we look forward to meeting you all again at our next webinar, which will be focused on cybersecurity. Thanks so much, and have a great day.